two men wearing convincing uniforms talk their way inside the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, Massachusetts. Once inside, they stole 13 works of art and disappeared. No art has ever been recovered, and nobody has ever been arrested for the crime. What there has been over the years is an avalanche of theories, suspects, dead ends, and trails gone cold. Was it notorious mobster Whitey Bulger? Was it the IRA, the Irish Republican Army? Was it members of the Boston Mafia running a crime syndicate out of a tiny, inconspicuous auto shop located just 4 miles from the Gardner Museum? Or did it have ties to art thief Myles J. Connor? Hi, my name is Jamie Lee and I am a mixed media artist. Here on my channel I do time-lapse art videos, I talk about art supplies and techniques, and I also do videos on art stories that I find interesting, and I hope you do also. Hit the subscribe button if you're into that sort of thing, and ring the bell to be notified when I post videos. In today's video, I will be going over the many suspects and theories in the world's biggest art heist. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, I recommend doing that first, otherwise you might be kind of lost. I will link it up here. At the end of this video, part 2, let me know in the comments what your theory is. Let's get started. There are lots of theories, but from my research, I've found 10 that seem to be the most popular / probable. Theory number 1, the "we wished this was the answer" theory. Let's get the popular but unlikely theory out of the way first. Whitey Bulger. Bulger was Boston's top mob boss and an FBI informant. He ran the infamous Winter Hill Gang in the 70s and 80s, and was known to have a hand in almost everything in the Boston area, crime-wise that is. Which means that if the Gardner heist happened on his watch, he had to know about it, right? Well, according to Bulger, no. And it kind of pissed him off. Criminals doing their thing were supposed to cut Bulger in, or at least let him know. And for a criminal act of this magnitude to happen right under his nose without his say-so was kind of a big deal. Bulger and his right-hand man, Flemmy, even tried to solve the Gardner heist themselves, but he insists they came out empty-handed. Even when perks from the authorities were dangled in front of him, he still never copped to any knowledge of the crime. Most involved in the case, including the FBI, say there just isn't any evidence to tie him to the crime. Now, of course, we can't ask him, as he was killed in prison on October 29th, 2018, by inmates who were apparently pretty angry with, as his official cause of death was blunt force injuries to the head. One person, however, feels that Bulger was involved. Scotland Yard's Charles Hill, who believes Bulger had the art shipped to Ireland, since the Irish-Italian Winter Hill Gang had ties to the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. Also, this won't be the last time the IRA pops up in a theory. Theory number 2 is the obscure theory. A lesser-known theory is from longtime Gardner sleuth Steve Kurkjian, probably butchering that name, but bear with. He believes the Gardner Museum heist was pulled off by someone named Royce. I know, who? I had to look this up. He was so sure of this theory being the one that he wrote a book about it. However, in my research, the only time this name comes up is in tandem with Kurkjian. Now, Kurkjian is no crackpot. He's a 40-year veteran of the Boston Globe and has won 3 Pulitzer Prizes. He says the FBI's official theory has holes, and he admits that the FBI doesn't really seem interested in his version of events. However, Kurkjian spoke to Royce, and Royce told him that he was supposed to be cut 15% of the Gardner Museum heist for his role in devising the Gardner plan. Also, Kurkjian believes that the authorities, the FBI, everybody involved with investigating the Gardner heist really didn't do their due diligence, as he has found at least half a dozen people that are connected to the case that were never even interviewed, who he spoke to and said had, if not valuable information, at least new leads that should have been pursued. Theory number 3 is the official FBI theory. In 2005, 15 years after the theft, the Gardner Museum hired a security director named Anthony Amore. In addition to whatever his security direction duties were, he also dove headfirst into the heist, working closely with the FBI on all their leads and theories. In fact, he and the FBI's Jeff Kelly have what they believe to be the actual answer to this mystery. In a news briefing in 2013, where the FBI asked the public's help in sending them tips and leads for the case, they also announced that the 2 men who actually committed the robbery were known to the FBI, and both men were dead. The names of these men were not given during the briefing, but sources have listed 2 men named Reissfelder and DiMuzio. They were 2 mobsters working under Carmello Merlino. He was the owner of an auto shop located 4 miles from the Gardner Museum. This auto shop will come up again, by the way. The auto shop, TRC Auto Electric, did actually perform auto repair work, but it also did other fun things, such as serve as a front for the Patriarcha drug ring. Under the direction of Merlino, Reissfelder and DiMuzio robbed the Gardner Museum, according to the FBI. The art moved through organized crime rings to Connecticut and Philadelphia before the trail apparently went cold in 2003. Unfortunately, the authorities could no longer ask either man about their involvement in the heist. DiMuzio was shot to death in 1991, and Reissfelder died of a drug overdose in 1991. Evidence to support this particular theory includes the fact that Reissfelder actually drove a red Dodge Daytona, which was the getaway car during the heist. Also, family members claim that they saw Manet's Shea Tortoni hanging in Reissfelder's apartment living room 3 months after the heist. However, published accounts are mixed as to whether these 2 particular men are the ones that in fact carried out the robbery and that the FBI has fingered as the suspects in the robbery, as during that news conference they didn't actually state the names of the 2 men. Some believe that the 2 men are 2 different men, including Bobby Donati, who will come up in a later theory. Also, if you go to fbi.gov/Gardner, which is the FBI's official site for the Gardner heist, there have been no updates on their webpage since 2013. And with this being 2020, that's a long time for no updates when the FBI says that this is actually still an active case. Theory number 4, the guard did it theory. Oh, Rick Abath. Stoner hippie dude or cunning criminal? The FBI officially said they never ruled out Abath's involvement, but they also never seriously considered him a suspect. So where does that leave the Grateful Dead loving night guard? To borrow a term from murder mystery makeup YouTuber Bailey Sarian, that's suspicious. Whispers have swirled since the day after the robbery that if Abath didn't pull off the heist, he at least had a hand in it. Here's why. A, the Blue Room Manet conundrum. B, the door opening. And C, the mysterious video from the night before where he let someone unauthorized into the museum. So A, the Blue Room. Remember, Abath was the only person recorded entering the Blue Room the night of the robbery. The Blue Room was the room where the Manet was hanging and stolen from, and the Manet was taken out of its frame and the frame was brought to the security director's office and left on his chair. And the thieves never tripped the motion sensors in the Blue Room. How in the world did they take that painting if they never entered or left that room? B, the door opening. Earlier on the night of the robbery, there is surveillance video footage showing Abath opening the Palace Road door to the museum looking out and then closing the door behind him. He says that this was part of his regular security routine, even though security personnel for the museum have said that that's not part of their protocol and they were never supposed to open doors to look out them in the middle of the night. And C, the mysterious surveillance video. This video is mentioned in numerous articles pointing to the fact that Abath seems to be pretty shady. Speculation ran rampant over who the mystery person he could have let in on the video the night before the robbery, until it was later revealed that the person he let in was in fact the museum's security director. The FBI had even released the video footage asking for the public's help in identifying the mysterious person on the video. So he let his boss in? This is the answer to the great mystery? Even though in that answer it's still odd. Why did it take years to admit it was his boss? Why does Abath continually insist that he doesn't remember doing this? I mean, if I was at work and my boss asked me to open the door, I would open the door. And then later, if I was asked about it, I would say, yeah, I let my boss in. He's my boss. I do what he tells me to. Unless, number one, I wasn't supposed to be letting my boss or anybody else in. Or number two, I was asked to play dumb if I was ever asked about it. I don't think this theory is the answer, but there are things about this piece of the puzzle that just don't add up for me. And many who have studied this case wonder if there were actually 2 robberies that occurred that night. The 12 works that were stolen by the 2 men in uniform, and the Manet painting, which could have been stolen separately. Theory number 5 is the Bobby's theory. Bobby Gentile and Bobby Guarente, or Bobby the Cook and Bobby Boos. Robert Bobby the Cook Gentile was a Boston-born mobster, but he was associated with the Bruno Scarfo crime family out of Philadelphia. According to the Gangster Report, in 2012, the FBI recovered a handwritten list of the pilfered masterpieces with accompanying black market values during a search of Gentile's Connecticut home. They also found ammunition, guns, silencers, explosives, cash, plus police caps and handcuffs. The list itself was folded inside a copy of the Boston Herald from the day the news broke about the Gardner heist. Gentile has also been tied with an eyewitness account to at least 2 of the stolen paintings, and was also caught on a wire discussing his connection to the art. Gentile also failed a polygraph exam for lying about what he knows regarding the Gardner Museum heist. Gentile has been offered a surprising number of deals by authorities in exchange for info on the paintings, but he's refused them all. He sounds like the ultimate example of snitches get stitches. Robert Bobby Boos Guarente is Gentile's former partner in crime. Guarente's widow, Eileen, has told authorities she was present when Guarente gave 2 of the stolen paintings to Gentile in the parking lot of a Portland, Maine diner in the early 2000s. Guarente was also tied to TRC Ottawa Electric. How surprising. His summer home in Maine was twice mentioned by confidential sources as the place the stolen Gardner art was stashed. Guarente died of cancer in 2004. Gentile and Guarente were at first part of an East Boston crew of mobsters belonging to the Philadelphia Mafia in 1998, and helped set up kind of like a New England satellite of the Bruno Scarfo crime family. Investigators suspect Gentile and Guarente of trying to broker black market deals of a number of the Gardner Museum paintings in Philly around the same time of the alleged painting exchange in Portland, Maine. However, Gentile has served lengthy prison sentences rather than give up info on the heist. And why would someone do that unless he was being truthful? Maybe in retaliation? After all, he did say, quote, "The feds ruined my life." So it wouldn't be that far-fetched for him to hold back info in order to get back at them. This must have been super frustrating for the authorities that he has never talked, because they allege that he offered to sell the paintings for $500,000 each to an undercover FBI agent. Theory number 6 is the con man theory. This theory proposes that a famous Hollywood screenwriter was behind the heist, except he wasn't a screenwriter at all. He was a con man who spent his short 43 years on this planet trying to convince everyone that he was more important and more interesting than he actually was. His name was Brian McDevitt, and he first popped up on the radar posing as Paul Sterling Vanderbilt, trying to pass himself off as a member of the famed family by driving around Glens Falls, New York in a Bentley and telling everyone that he was staying with a member of the Vanderbilt family. What was he really doing there? Planning a heist. He devised a plan to rob the Hyde collection, a museum inspired by the Gardner. He and an accomplice kidnapped a FedEx driver and headed to the museum to tie up the employees, cut the art from its frames, and make a getaway to sell the art. But as dumb criminals do, they forgot to account for a few factors. In this case, traffic. They got held up in traffic, the museum closed for the day, and they were caught with the poor FedEx driver in their possession. So McDevitt served time, but at the time of the Gardner heist, he was living in Boston, trying to convince his girlfriend that he wrote for the Wonder Years TV show and various movie studios. The Gardner heist had a similar MO to the Hyde collection attempt, and McDevitt didn't have an alibi for the night of the Gardner heist, as he claimed to be out of town at a Writers Guild awards ceremony that wasn't actually held that night. Soon after the heist, he actually moved to California, where he tried to convince people out there that he was a television and film writer. However, it wasn't long before people stopped believing him and his lies caught up with him. He was accused of being a fraud and a thief. The New York Times published that he was a prime suspect in the Gardner Museum heist, and when they interviewed him, he didn't have a credible alibi for that night. He also tried to say that he had been paid $300,000 to pull off the Gardner Museum heist, and then he vanished. He resurfaced years later in Brazil and Colombia, where it seemed he was waiting for the statute of limitations to run out. But instead, his luck ran out, and he died in 2004. Theory number 7, the art thief theory. A man named William P. Youngworth Jr. caused a sensation in 1997 when he began talks with the FBI to provide what he said was credible inside info on the heist. He even appeared at a press conference speaking about his supposed knowledge. Youngworth claimed he knew where the paintings were, and to prove his claim, he invited Boston Herald reporter Tom Mashberg to a warehouse to view the Rembrandt painting, Storm on the Sea of Galilee. Mashberg was thoroughly convinced that the canvas before him in the glare of the flashlight was the lost painting stolen from the Gardner Museum, and he ran a story with the catchy headline, "We've seen it!" Then he sat back in anticipation of the heist being solved, and the paintings returned to their Gardner home. That, unfortunately, never happened. Despite some credible info and evidence, the talks between Youngworth and the FBI fell through. So why did this promising situation go south so quickly? Well, for one, Youngworth. Some say the FBI didn't want the case to be solved because they negotiated with a criminal. He was an antiques dealer from Brighton, Massachusetts, who had a long criminal history and posed himself as many things, but most of the time just tried to convince people that worthless junk was priceless antiques. He claimed a connection to famed art thief Myles J. Connor, a connection Connor acknowledged but said was greatly exaggerated. It does appear that Youngworth was tasked with watching over trunks and trunks full of Connor's priceless art collection, while Connor was serving his time in prison. But Youngworth was a drug addict, and his duty to Connor's treasures ended up being less important than his next score. Connor claims that he sold off untold number of priceless artwork to fuel his habit, enraging Connor in the process. Many looking into the Gardner heist also wonder if the trunks contain something else, the stolen Gardner works. When Youngworth began his negotiations with the FBI, saying he could prove he knew where the artwork was kept, he asked for 3 specific things in return: the $5 million reward, immunity from prosecution and dismissal of the charges against him, and the release of Connor from his prison sentence. Now, it's obvious that Connor didn't pull off the heist. He was in prison in Chicago, as I said in the first video. Connor was tied to Youngworth and tied to the Gardner Museum. Remember, he cased it with Bobby Donati in 1975. Stolen paintings are often used as bargaining chips by criminals. Bobby Donati and Connor stole Wyeth paintings from the Woolworth Mansion in Maine in 1974, but they were caught. Before Myles was put away, he knew he would need a way out, so he hatched a scheme to steal a Rembrandt from Boston's Museum of Fine Arts in broad daylight. And he did. It had the effect he hoped. His sentence was lightened in exchange for him returning the Rembrandt. But then he was later busted for transporting stolen property across state lines in 1989. So back to jail he went. He couldn't have physically pulled off the Gardner heist, but he could have had people do it for him. Two men who had been linked to Connor for years. One was our friend Bobby Donati, and the other was David Houghton, who actually oversaw Myles' collection of priceless art, some gained legally and some not, before turning over this duty to Youngworth. As luck would have it, both Donati and Houghton ended up dead not too long after the Gardner heist. Donati in a brutal murder in 1992, where he was found stabbed and tied up in the trunk of a Cadillac, and Houghton in 1992 from a weight-related heart attack. So now, the story goes like this. Connor and Youngworth knew each other from as far back as 1978, when they met in prison. Connor provided mentorship to Youngworth, and Youngworth liked to insert himself into Connor's exciting escapades, whether he was really there or not. But he and Connor did keep in touch through the years. And he did take over Myles' $2 million art collection, and then betrayed his friend by selling off the items for drugs. In a bet to redeem himself, Youngworth attempted to get Connor out of prison by offering up the stolen Gardner paintings, a move Connor might have approved of since he was a master at bargaining art for time served. However, Connor found out Youngworth had been selling off his precious stash, and Youngworth couldn't convince everyone completely that the painting he showed Mashberg in the warehouse was real and not a replica. The FBI wanted better proof, and Youngworth wanted that $5 million reward. So he offered up a small vial of paint chips, claiming they would prove to be from the stolen Rembrandt. That deal with Youngworth fell through, and the story became just another disappointing dead end in the Gardner saga. Or did it? The paint chips tested to not be from a Rembrandt, but they were then passed on to another expert, who stated they were similar to paintings done in the same time frame and location as ones done by none other than Vermeer, and that the red paint was red lake, a popular pigment used by Dutch artists, and also used on the chair in the stolen Vermeer painting, The Concert. Curiously, this whole theory involving Youngworth and Connor and the paint chips has an even stranger tie to the Gardner heist. Anthony Amore, Gardner Museum security director and part-time Gardner heist investigator, and Myles Connor are now great friends. Amore believes Connor was not involved, even though he does acknowledge that Myles J. Connor might be the greatest art thief who ever lived. He says Connor would have been able to provide him with info about the heist if he was involved. Is this true? Or is this the greatest trick Connor has performed in a lifetime of daring criminal acts? Theory number 8 is the Dutch PI theory. Arthur Brand is a Dutch PI who is known as the Indiana Jones of the art world. Whether this is a self-named title or not, I don't know. He does have some impressive painting recoveries in his career though, due to his willingness to infiltrate the very groups that are responsible for stealing rare and valuable artwork. Brand claims that he has 2 good leads in the Gardner case. Lead number 1, a Dutch criminal showed 2 new photos of the stolen paintings in the 1990s to try and sell them. And lead number 2, well, this second lead he won't disclose, only that it involves the IRA, the Netherlands, and the paintings. Was it Colonel Mustard in the study with the candlestick? His IRA sources say that the paintings have been talked about within the IRA for years, and that members of the IRA know where they're located. At the time of the article I read, which was in about 2017, Brand claimed to be negotiating with his sources for a return of the paintings. When asked about Brand and his theories, Gardner's security director Anthony Amore said they'd been looked into. Theory number 9 is the French Corsican mob theory. According to his book Priceless, the FBI's art crime team founder, Robert K. Whitman, says that he was this close to getting 2 of the paintings back in 2006-2007 in an undercover sting that took place over several months in locations ranging from Miami, Florida to the south of France. He was working on gaining the trust of 2 French criminals with ties to the Corsican mob and was all but ready to broker the sale of a Rembrandt and a Vermeer said to be stolen from a United States museum for $30 million. Whitman claims that just on the edge of the deal going through, the Boston office of the FBI undermined him, threatened to take him off the case, and ultimately botched the mission, blowing Whitman's cover and losing the lead and possibly the Gardner paintings for good. And theory number 10, the mysterious letter theory. Anne Hawley was just 6 months into her new job as the director of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum when the unthinkable happened. Thieves broke into her museum and made out with the biggest haul in the history of art heists. Imagine having that on your resume. Anne became just as determined as anyone involved to find these paintings and restore them to their rightful home. She worked with the FBI, pushed people in high places to take the theft seriously, and even made a plea to the Pope to spread the word and ask for information about the stolen paintings, especially the stolen Rembrandt, Storm on the Sea of Galilee, depicting Jesus and his disciples. In 1994, she became a big part of the investigation when she was sent an anonymous letter. It came from New York City and offered a small bit of information to gain credibility. The letter writer disclosed that the 2 men who broke into the Gardner Museum were not wearing Boston Police Department uniforms, as had been widely reported, but instead were wearing security guard uniforms, something that was known to people close to the case, but not obviously to the general public. The writer, an intermediary of sorts to the actual participants, asked for $2.6 million and immunity from being arrested in exchange for the paintings, and alerted the FBI, who agreed that this tip might be legitimate. They signaled their participation in the trade-off by doing what the letter writer asked, going to the Boston Globe and asking them to publish the number 1 in the currency box of the Sunday paper. The writer saw the newspaper and sent a second letter, where the writer seemed incredibly concerned about the aggressive participation of the authorities. After this, despite the writer assuring in the second letter that they would contact with at least some clues as to where the artwork was located, Anne Hawley never heard from the letter writer again. Hawley retired in 2015, leaving behind the empty frames that haunted her entire tenure as director of the Gardner Museum. Well, there you have it. Those are the 10 theories that have gotten the most scrutiny from people that have looked into the Gardner heist. While people differ on which people were involved or where the paintings actually went, 3 things seem fairly consistent. Number 1, organized crime was involved. Number 2, the paintings were most likely stolen as a bargaining chip and not for resale. Number 3, the 2 men in uniform who actually robbed the museum were likely not the people behind the theft. They were just taking orders. Which theory do I think is the right one? My opinion is that it's a combination of the FBI's official theory and the theory involving Myles Connor with Bobby Donati and William Youngworth. I also think some of the players in the other theories had a hand in it, or possibly knew more information than they were letting on. People like the 2 Bobbies, or even the guard Rick Abath, because there's just too many questions about that Manet painting. I also agree that some promising leads were either dismissed or not looked into enough, such as those paint chips. Do I think the paintings will ever be found? I don't know, honestly. It doesn't seem likely they were destroyed, but they could quite literally be anywhere in the world, hidden, covered up, just like the real, truthful answer to the mystery of the Gardner heist. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you like videos like this, please subscribe, ring the bell, and give me a thumbs up. Please let me know in the comments what your idea about the real theory to the Gardner heist. Which one do you believe? Where do you think the paintings are located? Which two men do you think actually broke into the museum, and what group or individual was telling them to do this? I would love to hear what you think, and I hope you have a great day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!